Hello, in this presentation we will track and pay bills within QuickBooks Pro 2018. If you've been working along with us, we will be continuing with the Get Great Guitars example. If not, that is okay. We're going to be processing and paying bills within this process, selecting those bills that will be paid and looking at what will happen and what the process is from the entering to the paying of bills. We currently have the open windows open. In order to open the open windows, go to View, Open Windows. We also have the Home tab open, which you can find at Company and Home Page. That being the only thing we have open at this time. If you have access to the backup file, you can restore that by going to File and Open Restore Company. That taking us all to the same place at the same point. If you don't have access to that, or if you haven't been working through the problem, that's okay. We can get the idea of the paying bill item within this presentation. So when we look at the enter bills and paying bills, clearly the idea from the flowchart will be that we are going to enter bills. We're going to have bills that will be entered typically through the enter bills window here. Then later, of course, paying those bills. We may also have received bills from the receive inventory with a bill item here. I'm going to close that back out. The drop down here, receive inventory with a bill. So that will be the normal flow. The advantage of recording it in this way, meaning recording the bill before just writing the check, rather than just writing the check when we have the bills, are that we can then enter the bill at the point in time that we receive them, recording the bill on an accrual basis, even though we are not paying them, and then we can pick and choose which of those bills we want to record. So when we record the bill, what that does is it's going to record an accounts payable, meaning we owe money. It's going to track it by vendor for us, and it will record the related either expense or asset that we have purchased with that bill that is generated. That means that we have that information ready for us. It's part of our financials. It's been recorded in hopefully the proper time at the point in time that we enter the bill, even though we have not yet paid for it. If we wait, on the other hand, until we are going to pay that bill, then QuickBooks isn't able to really track that information for us, and we're not easily able to find out which bills we want to pay and track which bills we want to pay. And once we put it into the system, we're really only tracking it at the point in time that the check goes in, when we really should be tracking it at the point in time that we receive the bill, which would be closer to an accrual basis, meaning if we have a bill today for something that happened last month and we want to put that bill in now, that recording the expense at the time it was incurred, even though it has not yet been paid, also allowing us to track who we owe within the same system rather than just having a pile of bills that we're going to try to track. We can have them all laid out within QuickBooks. Once we enter all the bills, then we can pay the bills. Now when we pay the bills, it's helpful because when we select this pay bills option, it will generate paychecks if we generate those paychecks within QuickBooks, or we can write the checks by hand and just use the enter bill and pay bills icon in order to track the payment of the bills as well. It's helpful when we print these things out to have all the bills paid at one time. If we are writing checks within QuickBooks, we can take all those checks, put them into the printer at the point in time that we pay the bills and print them all at one time. That is a useful feature. If we select the pay bills here, we're going to go through the bills. We only have the two of them. If we go through the process, we're going to say we're not going to filter. If we wanted to filter, if we had a lot of bills here, we can filter through this and use different filter options in order to choose the ones we want. Sort by due date, another sorting option which could be useful in order for us to track which ones we want to pay first. Then we have the due on or before, another option that can help us to limit the amount of bills that are in there and try to figure out which ones we want to pay first. In this case, we're going to pay this item first. So we will choose Fender here. That's the only bill we're going to pay. We're going to keep this outstanding, and it will be there next time once we go through this again. If we go through the rest of this item, we're going to go through these items. We're going to keep these as is. We have the payment date, which is going to be 2/21. That's going to be the date of the check. Obviously, if it was real life, we would be issuing the check. That would be the current date. If we were entering this data just to process it and writing the check outside, then we want the date of the check. And then we're going to say it's going to be a check. Now, if we're going to print the checks, then we would go to this item, we would print the checks, then we would have to put the checks into our printer. If we're printing multiple checks, it would print multiple checks at that point in time, which can save a lot of time. If we're printing a lot of checks, we want to make sure that we have the checks in there properly, and meaning they're facing the right way and whatnot, given the dimensions of the printer and what we need to do for a particular printer in order to then print them out, and we can print them all out at one time. The reason we have to not just print them on a piece of paper is that we want to have those external check numbers there. That's going to be one big verification, one big check, internal control for the cash. We here are not going to be printing them. We're going to assign the check number, just recording the check numbers as though we were going to print the checks or write the checks outside of the system, and then record that data into the system. So we're going to pay selected bills. We'll then need to assign the check number. So I'm going to say 1015. That's going to be the next check. What we do, if we don't know that, we're going to take a look at our check register and see what the next check is in sequence. And if we pick the first check, that's the next check within sequence, in this case 1015, and we were to print multiple checks, then QuickBooks would assign the next check for the following amount, 1015, 1016, and so on. If we let QuickBooks assign the checks, it should pick the next check that is due within the sequence and then assign them as appropriate in order in that format. So we're going to go ahead and say OK, and we're going to record those checks. I'm going to close this item out. And then if we go to the reports and see what is going on, we can go to reports. We can go to company and financial, and we're looking for the balance sheet. I'm going to change the date ranges in the customize reports so that when we drill down, we can see the transaction detail. We're going to go from 01/01/21 to 12/31/21 and say OK. Then if we look at our checking account, we're going to select the balance within the checking account. Scrolling to the bottom, we see the check written here. That in this case, the 168 was the check that we just wrote, the 168, and it's check number 1015. So it's actually a date before a check that was written prior to this in our problem. We're going to double click on that, and it generates a check. Now note it's generating a check, and we have not yet seen this. This isn't the same screen we saw. We just checked off that we wanted to pay that item. But QuickBooks, of course, will drive that with the check. The forms are what drives the QuickBooks operations, and when we pay the bills, we pay them with a check, whether we actually make a check and print the check or not. So when we go back into it, we'll see the same activity within the check. Went to vendor, and we got the amount, and then we've got the date and the vendor down here, and the amount once again. So I'm going to close this back out. The other side of that typically will be in accounts payable, us paying off what was due to our vendor in this case. So if we double click on the accounts payable, we're going to scroll back down. Here's that amount again. It was the check is the other side of it. Double clicking on that, we see that same check here. If we close this out, we may want to check that also in one other report, and that's going to be the accounts payable, at least one other report. So we're going to the reports, we're going to go to the payable or the vendor reports, and we're going to scroll down to the vendor balance detail. Within the vendor balance detail, we see that under vendor, our vendor, we have 168 paid in relation to the bill that was owed. We should see that being matched out and be able to track that as we pay our bills. When we process the bill through the accounts payable. So if we double click on that, we see that bill once again. One other case where we might want to know where that bill is and check that it has been processed is within the register. That can be a useful way to look at it, a familiar way, looking very similar to a register we may be using with our checkbook or have used or be used to using with a checkbook. So for that, we're going to go to Banking, Use Register. We're going to choose our checking account and say OK. And we should see that same item here. So here's the vendor, here's the amount, the accounts payable is the other account that was affected. it was a bill payment. If we double click on that item, we'll then see that check again. So you got to double click right on the bill payment in order to get here. And that's one of the ways that could be useful in order to see this information. It's often useful for me to go back to this check register because this is a nice familiar way to look at the data in a quick time frame. The other way, of course, the nice way to look at it is on the balance sheet and go to double clicking the checking account. But some people aren't as familiar with this type of layout as we may be with a check register layout. Same information for the most part, but sometimes it's nice to see within the register format right here. And so you can take a look at it within the register format and see that the check number has been processed and everything looks as it should in this item.